Hey, I'm Sarah Bardell, functional medicine nutritionist with Vibrant Via. Thank you so much for joining me. I am so excited to talk about this topic. It's one that has come up a lot in my practice lately. And calories versus hormones. What matters more? A lot of women, the reason I wanted to talk about this really was a lot of my clients are confused. And I hear all the time, this app, it says I should have lost 5 pounds and it's barely budged. Now, the rude awakening is your hormones are holding you back, but there's good news. There are some specific things that you can do to turn that around, and I'm going to show you today in this webinar. So let's dive in. I want to cover a lot of ground, and feel free to jump in the chat if you have questions or submit those afterwards, and I'll try to answer those. But I want to dig into the science first on the why, and then we're going to go into some action steps on the what that you can do about it to change it. So in the past, weight has been considered the result of basically how people process calories, with this familiar calories in minus calories out equals body fat. Now, there's a few false assumptions here, and it doesn't take into consideration that hormones run the show when it comes to regulating all this. It's just not that simple. It assumes, first of all, that calories in and calories out are sort of independent of each other. But our bodies are way smarter than that. For example, think about it. If you're decreasing 30% calories by about 30%, it's going to trigger a 30% decrease in calories out. You think your body wants to keep burning 2,500 calories when you're only eating 1,300 and die? No. So it's actually going to slow down, and it's probably going to create a little bit more cushion by lowering it just a little extra to conserve. Thank you, body, right? Two, it also assumes that basal metabolic rate is stable. Now, I'm going to put the basal metabolic calculator here in the chat so you can calculate yours, which is basically what your body burns if you are at rest to keep up just your basic functions. If you were just sitting on your couch all day, for example. The thing is, though, calorie intake is easy to measure, but expenditure is a lot more complicated, and it can go up or down by up to 50%. Now, this BMR number that you see here, that in the calculation, it's a good baseline, but your expenditure includes BMR. It includes the thermogenic effect of food, which basically means how much energy does it take to break down, digest, absorb, and assimilate your foods. Protein takes the most caloric expenditure or thermic effect. There's thermogenesis, there's exercise, there's post-exercise oxygen consumption. So there's a lot that goes into it. Some of it's in our control, a lot of it's not so much. Now, the third thing that I want to talk about is really eating as a conscious, intentional act, right? So we're taking in calories, and on the other side, body fat regulation is under our autonomic control. So basically the same system that controls our breathing, our heart rate. We don't have to think about it. It just continues to happen. It's not under conscious control. So we need to be in homeostasis or balance when it comes to our hormones in order for that to work properly, since it's really out of our control. Now, fat stores are regulated like every system of the body. So, for example, growth hormone determines our height. Insulin and glucagon are like this teeter-totter, these two hormones that determine blood sugar levels. Thyroid hormone regulates body temperature. Fat cell growth, it gets regulated by hormones like leptin and ghrelin, adiponectin, hormone-sensitive lipase, and a few others. Now, we've also got hormones that control, well, there's boys and girls too. We've got hormones that control leptin, ghrelin, estrogen. Boys and girls, when they're growing up, they tend to have about the same body fat percentage before puberty. But then afterwards, women have 50% more body fat than men, despite men eating even more calories. So it's hormones. So the final thing that I want to talk about is a calorie is a calorie. And most of you probably agree that the quality of your food matters. It's why you're here. 500 calories of broccoli sends a completely different genetic signal and hormonal message than 500 calories of gummy bears. So are all calories equally likely to cause fat? And does it just come down to calorie intake? Absolutely not. All calories are not equally likely to cause weight gain. So it's turning out that 50 years of obsessing over that in nutritional research has been a dead end. So we really need a reframe. So what causes weight gain if not calories? I'm going to screen share here quick, and I want you to pitch in and let me know what you think is the cause, and I would love two guesses. Here are all the hormones that control weight and hunger. And I'm going to scroll through slowly. I'll send those to you afterwards as well. But I'm curious. There's a lot that play a role, but only two that are causal. Any guesses? We've already passed both of them actually. But these are all the players. Yeah, I'll send this to you because there's a lot of good action steps in here to balance. Any guesses? So, insulin is one of them, and cortisol is the other one. So that's a good starting place, right? We know basically if we're looking at all the human studies, those are the two that are causal. Like I can inject you with insulin, or I can give you cortisol and cause you to gain weight. So what's happening when we try to reduce calories and fail to lose weight? A few things are going on here. Our reduced metabolism from the weight loss is only the start of the problem. We've got hormone signals like hunger hormones like ghrelin. I think of that as like a growl of your stomach. It spikes to make sure that we regain that lost weight and return to our set point. And then satiety hormones go way down, and they stay there at least for at least a year, so you don't feel full as easily. And then there's this vicious cycle of under eating, right? We cut calories to lose weight, kind of works for a while. Our metabolism slows down, hunger goes up, and then we double down by eating even less, and we lose a little bit while energy expenditure goes down even more and hunger increases even more. So we start regaining weight, and this cycle continues until we've either thrown in the towel and said our metabolism isn't working, or it's a lost cause, or we continue the cycle until we're cold, tired, hungry, obsessing about calories and gaining the weight back. It seems like a cruel joke. So once you cut calories, here's what happens. Energy stops going towards heating your body. Your blood pressure might lower. You're going to have reduced activity, lethargy, fatigue. You might even start losing your hair, your nails start growing a little slower, and then it creates that safety margin we talked about. So it's going to crank it down just a little bit more. There was this study decades ago called the Minnesota Starvation Study, and they only lost 37 pounds when they should have lost 78 pounds with such severe caloric restriction in order to keep losing the weight. But then within 12 weeks, they regained that weight back really fast, and it continued to increase until it was even higher than pre-experiment. Sounds familiar, right? So there was also a Women's Health Initiative study, and they found the same thing. It was a 2-year study, the Eat Less, Move More study. No difference between the two groups at the end. Sure, for like the first 6 to 12 months, there was a slight difference, but that's kind of what we're seeing too. Basically, every diet works for about 6 to 12 months, and then it doesn't. And they're all sort of touching on a different aspect of this problem, but not really fully addressing everything that goes into it. Now, cortisol and insulin, of course. But the other thing that you might find surprising is our metabolism doesn't actually decrease between age 20 and 60, but we do lose lean muscle mass. So overweight people don't actually have a lower metabolism. It's actually significantly higher than lean active people because it's trying to burn off excess calories. It wants to get back to that set point. The set point is too high. And so eating more is actually a consequence, not a cause, because of what we talked about earlier. Low satiety hormones, high hunger hormones, and that set point also creeps up on us at a rate of about 2 pounds a year on average. So, is this a losing battle? I mean, what can we do about it? That's what we're here for, right? Let's start by focusing on the two hormones we know with 100% certainty cause weight gain in order to start to course correct. So insulin and blood sugar, and then cortisol, supporting your adrenals, stress management, sleep, minerals and nutrients that help to support your adrenal glands. So what drives insulin? Pretty much every time you eat, and there's an insulin spike, and it doesn't always correlate with glucose or blood sugar, which is super fascinating and another talk for another time. But basically, you want to balance your fasting and feasting windows. So one of the things that you can do is not snacking all day, right? Every time you put something in your mouth, there is an insulin spike. Not drinking a lot of high fructose corn syrup or artificial sweeteners, sugar sweetened beverages. Yeah, even things like aspartame, non-caloric beverages, aspartame, sucralose, possibly even stevia, I know, are known to spike insulin because your body is expecting something sweet to come down the pipe. And even if it doesn't affect your glucose, it's affecting your insulin. So if it's chronically elevated through what you eat or how often you eat, anytime your body is flooded with any hormone, it's going to regulate and sort of become resistant to that, right? Block off some of those receptors. So in the case of insulin resistance, we can't pull that glucose into our muscle anymore. So the other thing, sleep and stress, they also deeply impact blood sugar, insulin, and hunger hormones too. You've probably noticed after one bad night's sleep, you are craving comfort foods, you are ravenously hungry, and there is a good reason for that. So when we're talking about balancing eating and fasting, think about a good baseline is a 12-hour window, right? So going 12 hours overnight, once you end dinner, before you have breakfast, that is a great balance and a great starting place. And then from there, we can ebb and flow a little bit if the rest of your hormones are, you can tolerate it. You're not high cortisol or hypoglycemic, but we can always work up to that. 12 hours is a good window that most people should stick to. Now, high insulin, it's our fat storage hormone too. So it encourages sugar and fat storage. Low insulin, when you've gone through that overnight 12-hour fast or had more low carbohydrate, low glycemic foods, it encourages glycogen burning and fat burning. So we want more of those time periods because that's a way that intermittent fasting can be effective at reversing insulin resistance without a lot of the negative effects that we talked about of the calorie restriction kind of vicious cycle. Now, stress management and sleep are so powerful to reduce cortisol and control insulin as well. And if we work together or you've heard me talk, we've always touched on that because it can be a place that women get stuck no matter how pristine their diet is. Now, sugar and carbohydrate also increase blood glucose. So it provokes that insulin response from the pancreas. Whereas something like olive oil, for example, that gets pulled in by the small intestine and transported to the liver with no insulin response. So is our set weight unchanging? I had a couple of people asking, like, what can we do about that? Am I stuck? No, it is that creep, that slow creep, right? Like maybe it's just that 1 to 2 pounds over the holidays that you don't quite get off. But on average, it's only 1 to 2 pounds. But it's just over decades, you get this gradual increase in your set weight. And so people who struggle with weight tend to actually have about 20% higher fasting insulin and an exaggerated insulin response, meaning it goes up way higher than it should in response to food. So that's how you can make anyone fat by prescribing insulin injections, right? So it's a causal relationship. Now, about 70% or 70 to 75%, I think, of weight loss in people who are overweight is predicted by insulin, not willpower, not calories, not peer pressure, not even exercise, as amazing as exercise is. Hormones get regulated automatically, telling us we're hungry, we're full, bump up the energy expenditure or adrenaline, or shut it down, your thyroid, it might get affected. So why do we gain fat, right? Because our body's thermostat set point is too high. And that is because our insulin levels are too high. So that's how insulin causes weight gain, even when you reduce calories. Now, high insulin also inhibits these leptin hormones, these satiety hormones that increase with body fat. So again, like we get stuck in this vicious cycle. But if we just go back to the basics of focusing on lowering insulin through our food, what we eat, and through our timing, you start to get the message to stop eating. You have more satiety, you're more able to be metabolically flexible and switch back and forth. And then someone had asked, do you recommend a continuous glucose monitor? I think it's an amazing tool to use, and it can really give us a lot of insight, especially if you're struggling throughout the day, or maybe you're feeling fatigued or low energy. Or I've got several women who've been waking in the night, and we've discovered that they're having these severe hypoglycemia, like low blood sugar episodes in the night. We wouldn't have known otherwise. So it's an amazing tool just to see what keeps your blood sugar stable, and also to correlate with what you eat and how you feel. So that being said, it doesn't always correlate with insulin. So something to keep in mind, we can technically test postprandial insulin, which is that spike, that response after you eat, because like I said, all foods trigger it: fat, carbohydrate, protein, sucralose, and aspartame. I mean, you could mess up your hormonal metabolic regulation just through Diet Coke and Celsius alone. So it's not a free hall pass. Now, the other one that I want to touch on a little bit more is cortisol. And it's hard to escape stress, right? I work mainly with high performing women, driven, used to pushing through, powering through, and it has got them success, but at a cost, right? So we need to build in these moments of time and days or hours, or just little moments where we are investing in ourselves. We have little moments of self-care. We are kind of sending our bodies and our nervous system just and the response to calm down, right? If that's too high for too long, it actually causes muscle breakdown. We want that lean tissue. That's what revs our metabolism, that keeps us looking strong and healthy, that allows us to use the food that we eat. And it starts to release amino acids. It drives up our blood sugar, and then it drives up insulin. It keeps us insulin resistant as well. So short-term physical stress, insulin and cortisol play kind of opposite roles, but long-term, when there's no resolution to the stressor, it's going to trigger this constant insulin release that we talked about, and your body's going to start blocking that to shut it down because it's just too high. And that's the other reason that a single night of sleep, your cortisol can be over 100% higher, and it stays almost 50% higher into the next evening. So you want to prioritize that. Sleep deprivation can undermine weight loss efforts. However, the good news is some of you just can't control it, right? You have children who need you in the night, or early morning flights. There's a lot at play. They're actually low stress conditions, or you can offset that with kind of some stress management practices, getting a little extra movement in the next day. So over time, though, that insulin resistance, when it's chronically elevated, either the insulin or the cortisol, it's going to develop in our liver and in our muscles. So you want to do, for some people, a high protein, low glycemic diet works great. Some people need a little more fat, moderate protein. Either way, we want to severely restrict sugar, processed carbohydrates. It's not doing us any favors, and most of them are not loaded with the phytonutrients that we need, especially heading through perimenopause and menopause, when it's naturally more of an inflammatory state, and naturally some of these hormones are trying to work against us, but we have a lot of say here. So our satiety hormones just they respond really well to eating proteins and fats. It kind of signals that stop, and that's where highly processed foods, they don't trigger that satiety hormone release, which makes total sense why cake after dinner is like, or ice cream after dinner is like a second stomach phenomenon. I used to joke that it would like fill all the little gaps in between the food in my stomach, but refined carbs, they activate our reward pathway really heavily too. So no one's addicted to apples, spinach, steak, right? And then not all cells get equally resistant. It's mostly our brain, liver, and muscle, exactly the ones that we do not want to kind of plug their ears when it comes to that insulin signal. So something that we can do cyclically for women, cutting carbohydrate in a cyclical manner while maintaining really high fiber and high antioxidants, can really start to reverse insulin resistance in your liver. Exercise lowers insulin resistance in your muscle, but appetite is actually controlled by the hypothalamus in your brain, and that can remain insulin resistant. So you want to chew really thoroughly. It takes at least 20 minutes for those hormones to turn on. We want to fast overnight, 12 hours, occasionally longer, not the week before your period, not if you've got hypoglycemia episodes or cortisol issues. But that's case by case. And if you have questions about any of those, let me know. I'll put a link to my calendar at the end. So if you have questions or if there's a place you're getting stuck, I'm going to offer 7 root cause breakthrough calls. So feel free to jump on. Now, fiber is magical when it comes to satiation too. It triggers your vagus nerve, tells us when we're full, produces short chain fatty acids in our gut. About 40% of the fiber that we eat is not for our human cells. It's going to our gut bacteria that produce this anti-inflammatory powerhouse compound that heals and seals our gut. And on average, it reduces our calorie intake by somewhere around 10%. So paleo times, they think it was well over 100, 150 calories or grams of fiber a day. And our average diet today contains about 15 grams, which is nowhere near enough. So we need to at least get to that 25 to 35 grams of fiber. And once you start tracking, I think you'll find it's harder than you think. So really be mindful of ways that you can increase fiber intake. Vinegar, that's another thing that can really support it. That's easy to add in. 2 tablespoons of vinegar diluted in water. Any kind of vinegar actually blunts the insulin response, even of a high carb meal, by like up to 40%. So if you know you're going to be celebrating, you're feasting, you're having a special night out, that can be something. And then apple cider vinegar, for a lot of people, it is a little bit easier to get down than other types of vinegar. And the good thing about that is it not only contains that acetic acid that blunts blood sugar, but it has apple pectin, which is a soluble fiber in there that your gut bacteria love. And then even adding pickled or fermented veggies, sauerkraut, kimchi, natto, things like that. Miso also lowered blood sugar response by somewhere around 35%. So paleo, Mediterranean, any kind of unprocessed whole foods, whole 30 type diet largely works, because even without counting calories, because it's unprocessed. And so that's the other thing. Get back to basics. You stop eating when you're full and you eat when you're hungry. It's a lot of it's the processing and not even the food itself. So there was bottom line, a couple things just to wrap this up and tie it with a bow. Walter Willett out of Harvard, he's this foremost researcher on obesity, and he found no association between fat intake and obesity. In fact, consuming healthy fats might be protective because it's satiating and keeps your glucose and insulin spikes at a minimum. So if you're trying to reverse that, we may want to flip the macros just a little bit so that we're keeping insulin low. And then the other bottom line, as I've mentioned, all diets work and all diets fail. And this is why they're following this familiar pattern of that we all know, short-term weight loss followed by this relentless gain. And then you're just gaining and losing the same 5 to 10 pounds over and over and over. So takeaways are to keep insulin low, the feasting and fasting, at least a 12-hour overnight fast. You want a moderate protein and a little bit higher fat diet, but you'll have to figure out which balance works for you in the long term. But you'll want to severely limit sugar and processed foods, sugary drinks and candies. No surprise there, right? But for some people, like a low carb, high fiber diet works best for high insulin. For others, the main problem might be insulin resistance, and fasting or intermittent fasting for a little while can be really beneficial. And other people, it's their cortisol pathways. Their adrenals are asking for help. They need a little extra support. It's dominant. So stress reduction, fixing sleep, that can be really critical, a piece of the puzzle. And then more fiber might be the solution for others. So we really need to tailor the approach to the root cause of the high insulin and high cortisol. Hopefully you guys found this helpful, got a few nuggets. I created a free PDF resource. So if you're stuck, if you want to lose weight, improve your energy, bust out of that yo-yo cycle. You can download my step-by-step plan at vibrantvia.com/belly fat. And then you can access my calendar through the end of the month. I opened up 7 additional calls at chatwithsara, SARA.com. And that's where you can get on my calendar for a free 30-minute root cause breakthrough call. So if you've tried a lot of this, if you're stuck and you just need to brainstorm on what are those hurdles, what is it for you, what approach might work best for you, we will walk through that, get you unstuck, and get you on your way to looking and feeling good, to having healthy energy, vitality, confidence. My goal is that you would confidently step into your calling, that you would be a good example to the people around you, that you would go into the next decade of life just with an excitement of knowing that each decade gets better and we have so much to contribute. And I just don't want, I don't want you to feel like being overweight or low energy or just feeling stuck is holding you back. So I am here to help. I'm here as a resource, and I would love to hear from you. Hope you guys have a great rest of your week.